The text message came in at 11:47 on a Tuesday night. And I almost missed it. I'd fallen asleep in my recliner again. The television still on, some late-night talk show host laughing at his own joke in the background. My phone buzzed on the side table, and I reached for it out of habit more than anything else. Expecting nothing more than a spam notification or maybe a news alert about something I'd deal with in the morning. It was my niece. "Uncle Daniel, are you awake?" I sat up straighter. Emma never texted me this late. She was 14 years old, and on school nights her mother had a strict rule about phones being in the kitchen by 9 o'clock. I'd heard about that rule plenty of times at Sunday dinners, usually from Emma herself, who thought it was the most unreasonable policy ever devised by any parent in the history of parenting. I typed back immediately. "I'm awake. What's going on, sweetheart?" The 3 dots appeared and disappeared twice before her response came through. "I think I hurt my shoulder. Mom's asleep. I don't want to wake her up, but it really hurts." I was already standing up, reaching for the lamp switch. "How did you hurt it?" Another long pause. Longer than it should have been for a 14-year-old who could type faster than most people I knew. "I fell on the stairs. Can you come?" Something about the way she wrote that stopped me. Not the words themselves, but the space between them. Emma was not a dramatic kid. She didn't call for help easily, didn't like to make a fuss, had gotten that quality from her mother's side of the family, which was also my side of the family, and which I'd always considered both a strength and a problem, depending on the situation. If Emma was texting me at nearly midnight asking me to come over, she wasn't doing it because she'd bumped her shoulder on a door frame. "Does it hurt a lot?" "Yes, like a lot. Uncle Daniel, please come." I had my jacket on before I finished reading the message. My sister Diane lived 20 minutes from me on a good night with no traffic. I made it in 14. I'd spent 31 years as a firefighter before I retired. And the thing that profession does to you, the thing people don't always understand, is that it rewires how you think about urgency. Most people accelerate their panic as a situation gets worse. After enough years on the job, you learn to do the opposite. The more serious something is, the calmer you become. Because calm is what gets things done. Fear is a luxury you can afford after everyone is safe, not before. I kept my breathing even the whole drive over. The porch light was on when I pulled up, which told me Emma had been watching for my headlights. She had the front door open before I reached the bottom step. And the first thing I noticed was that she was holding her left arm against her chest. Very still, the way you hold something when any movement makes the pain worse. The second thing I noticed was Nathan's truck in the driveway. Nathan had been living with my sister for 8 months. She'd met him the previous spring at a charity auction for the local animal shelter. Which was exactly the kind of story that sounds wholesome until it isn't. He was 52, ran some kind of property management company, had a way of talking to people that made him feel like they were the most interesting person in the room. Diane had been alone for 6 years after her divorce, and I understood why she'd been ready for something new. I didn't have anything specific against Nathan. I just didn't have anything specific for him either. And after 3 decades of learning to read situations quickly, I'd noticed things about him that I kept filed away in the back of my mind. The way conversations at the dinner table gradually shifted toward what he wanted to talk about. The way he sometimes answered questions directed at Emma before she could open her mouth. The way he looked at my sister when she laughed too long at someone else's joke. Nothing you could point to. Nothing you could name out loud without sounding like you were reaching. Just things I noticed and remembered. The way I always noticed and remembered things that didn't quite fit. "Let me look at that," I said to Emma, keeping my voice low. She stepped into the light from the living room lamp, and I could see her face clearly for the first time. She was pale in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. Her eyes were dry, which told me she'd been crying earlier and had stopped, which was sometimes worse. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that settles into a person after they've cried until they can't anymore. And Emma had it. I crouched down so I was at her level and looked at her shoulder without touching it. Even through her pajama top, I could see that something wasn't sitting right. The line of her left shoulder was slightly off. The way a piece of furniture looks when it's been moved and put back almost. But not exactly in the right position. "Okay," I said, "We're going to the emergency room. Mom will be upset if we wake her up." "I'll handle your mom. Where's Nathan?" "He went to bed a couple hours ago." She hesitated. "He said it was fine. He said I probably just bruised it." I stood up slowly. "He saw you. He heard me fall. He came out and looked and said I probably just bruised it." She was looking at the floor when she said it, not at me. "Emma." I waited until she looked up. "I need you to tell me exactly what happened." The 3 dots appeared and disappeared behind her eyes the same way they had in the text message. The same long pause before the answer. "I fell on the stairs," she said. I looked at her for a moment. Then I said, "All right, let's get your shoes on. I'm going to leave a note for your mom." I went to the kitchen and found a notepad on the counter. The one my sister kept for grocery lists. I wrote down that I was taking Emma to Riverside Memorial, that her shoulder needed to be looked at, and that I'd call as soon as we knew something. I wrote it calmly and clearly, the way you write things when you want the reader to understand that everything is under control. And also that they should get to the hospital as soon as possible. Then I looked at Nathan's truck in the driveway one more time before I started the car. The emergency room at Riverside Memorial was quiet on a Tuesday night. The particular quiet of a waiting room that has seen too much to be surprised by anything. A woman in scrubs at the front desk had us checked in within 10 minutes. And they took Emma back to an exam room not long after that. I stayed close, keeping my voice steady, making small talk about nothing in particular, because I'd learned a long time ago that when someone is in pain and frightened, the most useful thing you can do is give them something ordinary to hold on to. The doctor who came in was a woman named Dr. Bennett, maybe mid-40s, with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and the particular economy of movement that comes from doing a demanding job well for a long time. She introduced herself to both of us, asked Emma a few gentle questions about where it hurt and how much. Then did a careful examination that made Emma wince twice and go very still once. "We're going to get some imaging," Dr. Bennett said. "I want to see what's going on in there before we say anything definitive." She stepped out. Emma and I sat in the exam room, and I asked her if she wanted me to see if I could find a vending machine that had anything worth eating. And she said she wasn't hungry. And then she said, "Uncle Daniel, are you mad at me?" "Why would I be mad at you?" "I don't know, I feel like I'm making a big deal out of nothing. You texted me at midnight because your shoulder hurt bad enough that you couldn't sleep. That's not nothing." She looked at her hands. "Nathan said I was being dramatic." I kept my face very neutral. "When did he say that?" "When he saw me on the stairs. I was crying, and he said I needed to toughen up. That kids my age nowadays can't handle anything." She stopped. "He said, kids my age, like I wasn't standing right there." I let the quiet sit for a moment. "Emma, I'm going to ask you something. And I need you to know that whatever you tell me, we're going to figure it out together, okay?" "That's not me saying something to make you feel better. That's just true." She nodded, still looking at her hands. "Did you fall on the stairs?" The pause this time was the longest yet. I watched her jaw tighten and then release. I watched her make some internal decision that I could see in her face, even though I couldn't hear it. "He pushed me," she said. She said it very quietly. The way you say something you've been holding in your chest for so long that letting it out feels dangerous. Like opening a valve on a pressurized line. "Nathan pushed me. We were arguing. I said something he didn't like. And he grabbed my arm. And I tried to pull away. And he..." She stopped. "He shoved me toward the stairs. And I grabbed the railing. But my shoulder hit the wall coming down." "How long has he been grabbing you?" She looked up at me then. And I could see the surprise in her face that I'd said it that way. Not, "Has this happened before?" or, "Are you sure?" Just the plain assumption that this wasn't the first time because I already knew it wasn't. "A few months," she said, just grabbing, squeezing my arm when I talked back, cornering me in the kitchen when Mom's not in the room to tell me that I need to learn some respect. She pulled at the edge of the exam table paper the same way she used to pull at the hem of her shirt when she was small and anxious. "Mom doesn't see it. Does she know?" I told her once that he scared me. She said I needed to give him a chance. That he was still getting used to being around a teenager. She said it without bitterness. which was somehow sadder than if she'd said it with anger. I stopped telling her after that. Dr. Bennett came back in before I could say anything else. She had the imaging results on a tablet, and she pulled up the scan and turned it toward me, pointing to the area of concern with a stylus. "There's a fracture here," she said, "at the proximal humerus, the head of the upper arm bone just below the shoulder joint." She tapped the screen. "It's a specific kind of fracture pattern, what we call a traction injury, meaning the force that caused it was pulling or twisting rather than a direct impact." I looked at the image. "That's not consistent with falling," I said. "No," Dr. Bennett said. She said it simply, without drama, the way a professional states a fact. "A fall downstairs would typically produce a different pattern entirely. Impact fractures, possibly collarbone involvement if she reached out to catch herself. What I'm looking at here is consistent with significant force applied to the arm while it was being held or twisted." She looked at Emma then, and her voice stayed calm and matter-of-fact in the way that good doctors learn to deliver hard information. "Emma, I need to ask you directly. Did someone hurt your arm tonight?" Emma looked at me. I gave her the smallest nod. "My mom's boyfriend," she said. "He pushed me, and I was trying to get away from him." Dr. Bennett nodded as though this confirmed something she had already suspected. "Thank you for telling me. I want you to know that you did the right thing." She set the tablet down on the counter. "I'm a mandatory reporter, which means I'm legally required to contact Child Protective Services when there's evidence of injury to a minor that's inconsistent with the given explanation. That call has already been made. An investigator will be in contact, likely before morning." She looked at me. "Are you family?" "Her uncle, her mother is on her way." "Is the individual who caused the injury in the home?" "As of an hour ago. Yes." She nodded again. "I'll let the nursing staff know to flag the front desk. Is there somewhere safe for Emma to stay tonight that isn't that address?" "With me," I said. "She's staying with me." Diane arrived 40 minutes later, still in her pajamas with a coat thrown over them, her hair not brushed, moving fast through the waiting room in that particular way that mothers move when they're terrified and trying not to show it. I intercepted her before she got to the exam room because I needed 30 seconds alone with my sister before she walked in and said something she couldn't take back. "Emma has a fracture," I said, "a traction fracture. The doctor is very clear that it did not come from falling downstairs." Diane stared at me. "What does that mean?" "It means someone grabbed her arm and twisted it hard." She shook her head. "She fell, Daniel. Nathan said she fell. He heard the whole thing. He was there." "Diane, that's not the same thing as her falling." "He would not." She stopped, started again. "He is not that kind of person." I had known my sister for 63 years. I had watched her decide things. Sometimes good things, sometimes things that cost her. And I knew the look on her face right now. It was the look of someone who understood, on some level, what they were being told and was choosing, for reasons that were entirely human and entirely understandable, to put that understanding somewhere they didn't have to look at it yet. "There is a Child Protective Services investigator coming to this hospital tonight," I said, keeping my voice even. "The doctor called them because she is legally required to." Emma told me what happened. Emma told the doctor what happened. "Nathan pushed her. He has been grabbing her and cornering her for months. And she stopped telling you because the one time she tried, you told her to give him a chance." Diane's face went through several things in quick succession. I watched all of them. "She never." She started again. "She told you he scared her. About 4 months ago, I'd guess, maybe 5. The silence that followed told me I'd guessed right. I put my hand on my sister's arm. "Go see your daughter. She needs you to believe her right now more than she has ever needed anything from you. We can figure out everything else later." She went in. I stayed in the hallway and listened, which I'm not proud of, but I needed to know. I heard Diane's voice break almost immediately. I heard Emma start crying. The deep, uncontrolled kind that means the walls have finally come down. I heard my sister say, "I'm sorry, baby, I'm so sorry." And mean it in a way that you can't fake. The way that only sounds like that when it's real. I stepped away and sat in a chair in the hallway and looked at the ceiling for a while. The CPS investigator arrived at 1:45. Her name was Patricia. and she was a compact woman in her 50s with a no-nonsense manner that I recognized and respected. She spoke to Emma for a long time with the door mostly closed. Then she spoke to Diane. Then she came and found me sitting in the waiting room. "You're the uncle who brought her in," she said. "Daniel Mercer. I'm Diane Weston's older brother." She sat down across from me with a notepad. "Walk me through the timeline." I did. I told her about the text message, about what Emma looked like when I arrived, about what Nathan had said to Emma after she fell, about the truck in the driveway, about what Emma told me in the exam room. I told her about the things I'd noticed over the past 8 months that I'd filed away without quite knowing what to do with. I told it all straight, the way I'd been trained to give incident reports. Just the facts in order. No editorializing. Patricia wrote steadily while I talked. When I finished, she looked up and said, "You mentioned he'd been with your sister for 8 months. Do you know much about his background before that?" "Not much. He runs a property management company. I know the name of it." "That's helpful." She closed the notepad. "I want to be honest with you about how tonight is going to proceed. We're going to contact law enforcement, which means there will likely be officers going to the home. The individual will be asked to leave. Whether anything further happens depends on a number of factors, including what Emma's mother decides to do and whether there's a pattern that can be documented." "There's a pattern," I said. "Emma said this has been going on for months. Escalating." "It usually is." I looked at her. "Can you check if he has a record in another state?" "He moved here about a year ago. I don't know from where." She held my gaze for a moment. "We'll do a full background. That's standard." She stood up, tucked her notepad into her bag, and looked at me with the kind of expression that professionals develop after years of walking into situations like this one. "You did the right thing coming tonight," she said. "Kids in these situations almost never reach out. When they do, they usually reach out to one specific person. The fact that she texted you means she trusted you to actually come. A lot of adults don't." I was 30 minutes away. "That's not what I mean," she said. She left, and I went back to find Emma. They'd moved her to a more comfortable room while she waited to have her shoulders set and braced. Diane was sitting beside the bed holding Emma's good hand. And Emma was asleep, or something close enough to it that the difference didn't matter. Diane looked up when I came in. Her eyes were red and her hair was still not brushed. And she looked 10 years older than she had 2 hours ago. "I've heard people say that about grief, that it ages you in the short term and then you recover. I've also seen it not work out that way." I sat in the chair on the other side of the bed. We didn't talk for a while. The monitor beeped softly. Down the hall, someone laughed at something, a nurse or an orderly. Just a normal human moment in the middle of everything else. "I should have listened to her," Diane said finally. "Yes," I said. "You don't have to agree so fast. You should have listened to her. And you didn't, and now you know that. And you're going to carry it for a while. That's the right consequence. But she's here, she's okay, you're here, that's what matters tonight." Diane looked at Emma's sleeping face. She looked so much like that when she was little. When she slept, she used to hold onto my finger. "I remember. I can't believe I..." She stopped. "Don't finish that sentence right now," I said. "There'll be time for all of that later. Tonight, you just sit with her." She nodded and looked back at her daughter. And I looked at the window where the sky was starting to turn. The first faint gray of early morning. And we sat there together until the doctor came back. The next few weeks were not simple. They rarely are in situations like this. The shape of what happened was clear. But the aftermath is always more complicated than the event itself. Because the event is a moment and the aftermath is everything that comes after it. Which is to say the rest of your life. Nathan was asked to leave the house that night. Diane didn't resist. I think some part of her had been waiting for permission to do what she should have done months ago. And the combination of a CPS investigator and a police officer at the door at 3 o'clock in the morning had made the decision simple in a way that nothing else had managed to. He left. He took his truck and his 2 suitcases and he left. And I heard later from Diane that he texted her twice from the road saying that Emma was a troubled kid who was trying to break him up and that she needed to think carefully about who she was listening to. She didn't respond. The background check Patricia had run turned up something that I'd suspected but hadn't let myself say out loud. 4 years earlier in Tennessee, there had been a domestic violence incident involving a woman named Rebecca Briggs and her 11-year-old son. The case had been investigated, but never prosecuted because Rebecca had declined to cooperate. The child had been found to have bruising consistent with physical abuse. Nathan had been questioned. Nothing had been formally charged. When Patricia told me this, I sat in her office across from her desk and I looked at the file she'd placed in front of me. And I thought about an 11-year-old boy in Tennessee who hadn't had an uncle to call. He has a pattern, I said. He does, Patricia said, which means what happened to Emma was not an accident or a one-time loss of control. It was a behavioral pattern he has engaged in before with other families. What happens now? That depends on Emma and Diane. If Diane chooses to pursue charges, we have Emma's statement, the medical documentation, and the prior incident as context. That's a meaningful case. And if she doesn't pursue charges, then he goes somewhere else and finds another family. I thought about that for a long time after I left her office. Diane did pursue charges. It took her 2 weeks to make that decision. 2 weeks during which I knew she was turning it over in her mind in the middle of the night, weighing what she understood against what it would cost. I didn't push her. I told her once what I thought she should do, and then I let it be because she was a grown woman and this was her family and ultimately it had to be her choice or it wouldn't hold. She called me on a Friday evening and said, I talked to the DA's office today. Good, I said. They think it's worth pursuing. Between Emma's statement and the medical evidence and the prior case in Tennessee. She paused. Daniel, there's a little boy in Tennessee who never got justice. I know. I keep thinking about him. I know that too. I'm going to do this, she said, for Emma, but also for him. I told her I was proud of her, and I meant it. And she made a sound that was either a laugh or a cry and might have been both. Emma's shoulder healed over the following 2 months. I drove her to physical therapy on Thursdays, which I'd volunteered for, partly because I genuinely wanted to help and partly because the drive home was 20 minutes during which we talked. Just the two of us. About whatever came up. Sometimes it was the shoulder and how it was feeling and what the therapist had said. Sometimes it was school, friends, a book she was reading, a movie she thought was overrated. Sometimes she talked about Nathan, not with anger most of the time. Just with the particular flatness of someone trying to understand something that doesn't quite resolve into sense no matter how many times you turn it over. Why do people like that pick families with kids? She asked me once about a month after everything had happened. We were stopped at a red light on Mercer Road. Because kids are easier to control, I said. They don't have the same power to leave. They don't have the same options adults have. That's horrible. It is. Did you know before, did you have a feeling about him? I considered that. I noticed things that didn't sit right. I didn't put him together clearly enough. Fast enough. I wish I had. She was quiet for a moment. I wish I'd told Mom sooner. Or told you sooner. I kept thinking I was making it seem like more than it was. That's what people in those situations almost always think. He probably counted on that. He told me once that if I told Mom, she wouldn't believe me, that it would just make things worse for everyone. She said it like she was reporting a fact because that's what it was. He was almost right. He was wrong, I said. It took a minute, but he was wrong. She looked out the window at the houses going by. I'm glad I texted you. I'm glad you texted me too. Were you scared when you got the text? Did you know something was wrong? I knew something was wrong. I said, you're not a kid who asks for help when you don't need it. The minute I saw your name on that phone, I was already up. She turned to look at me. That's kind of a big deal, right? That you know me that well. It is, I said, and you know me too. You knew I'd come. She thought about that. Yeah, she said, I did know that. The case against Nathan moved slowly, the way legal proceedings do, and I won't pretend that the waiting was easy on anyone. There were difficult days, and there were better ones. There was a session with a counselor that Emma initially resisted and then, several weeks later, admitted was actually helping. There was a Sunday dinner at my house during which Emma laughed so hard at something her cousin said that she had to put her fork down. And Diane watched her, and the expression on my sister's face was something I won't try to describe except to say that it was the kind of thing you're glad you were in the room for. There was the night Diane called me at 10:30 because she couldn't sleep and needed to talk. And we talked for 2 hours about everything and nothing, the way siblings do when they've known each other long enough that they can move between subjects without explanation. And at one point she said, "Do you think I'm a good mother?" And I said, "I think you're a mother who made a mistake and is fixing it." And she was quiet for a long time. And then she said, "I'll take that." And I said, "You should." Patricia contacted me in the spring to let me know that the case in Tennessee had been reopened in light of the new evidence and that Rebecca Briggs had agreed to speak with prosecutors this time. I don't know how that will resolve. These things take time, and the outcomes are never as clean as we want them to be. But the boy from Tennessee, who is 15 now, would know that someone had gone back, that his story had mattered enough to go back. I thought about that a lot. Emma came back to full strength by May. The shoulder healed clean, which the physical therapist said was the best outcome they could have hoped for given the nature of the injury. And the last session ended with her demonstrating her full range of motion and then doing a small theatrical bow that made the therapist laugh. She was 14 years old, and she had been through something number 14-year-old should have to go through, and she was still herself on the other side of it. Still funny and stubborn and occasionally eye-rolling about the adults in her life, which I considered a very good sign. On the drive home from that last PT session, she asked if we could stop for ice cream. We stopped. We sat in the parking lot of a place called Margie's Soft Serve that had been there since before she was born. And she got a chocolate and vanilla twist with sprinkles. And I got a plain vanilla cup because I'm 63 years old and my stomach isn't what it used to be. And we sat in the car with the windows down in the May evening. And she told me about her plans for the summer and a group project at school that she was very annoyed about and a new song she'd been listening to on repeat. At some point she said, "Can I ask you something kind of serious?" "Always. Do you think it's going to be hard for Mom to trust someone again? Like if she ever dates again?" I thought about that. "Probably," I said, "but hard isn't the same as impossible. She seems okay most of the time." "She is okay most of the time. Give her space to not be okay the rest of the time." Emma nodded, picking a sprinkle off the top of her cone with her finger. "I think I'm going to be better at noticing stuff now, like warning signs. That's a good thing to be. Is it weird that I also feel kind of bad about having to be? Like I didn't ask to learn this lesson?" "No," I said, "that's not weird, that's the right response." She thought about that. "Did you learn stuff like that when you were a firefighter? Like things you didn't ask to learn?" "Every call was something I didn't ask to learn. You go in not knowing what's waiting for you. You come out knowing something you couldn't have known before." I looked at the parking lot. The early evening light coming long and gold across the asphalt. The job changes you. You see what people are capable of at their worst. And you also see what they're capable of when it counts. Sometimes those are the same person. She was quiet, finishing her ice cream. Then she said, "I think you're really good at showing up." I looked at her. "Like when it counts," she said, "you show up. That's the job." "No," she said, "I mean as a person." I didn't say anything for a moment. I looked at my youngest sister's daughter, 14 years old, sitting in the passenger seat with a half-eaten cone and a healed shoulder and a strength in her that I suspected she didn't fully know she had yet. "Thank you," I said. We drove home in the early evening. The windows down, the radio on low. Taking the long way along the river. The way I sometimes do when there's no reason to hurry. When the evening is just good enough to stretch out a little and let it be what it is. Emma fell asleep about 10 minutes from the house. The way she used to when she was small and we'd take long Sunday drives. Her head tipped against the window. Her good shoulder rising and falling in the easy rhythm of someone completely at rest. I drove the rest of the way quietly and pulled into the driveway and sat for a minute before I woke her up. Just sitting in the ordinary quiet of a good evening. There is a kind of emergency that announces itself loudly. You hear the call come over the radio. You see the flames from 3 blocks away. You know exactly what you're driving into and what it will require. 31 years in the fire service taught me everything about those emergencies. But there is another kind that comes in quietly, at nearly midnight. In a text message from a teenager who chose to reach out to exactly the right person at exactly the right moment. Those are the ones that don't announce themselves. Those are the ones that require you to be the kind of person someone already knows will come. I woke Emma up gently, and she blinked and looked around and said, "We're home already?" And I said, "Yes." And she got out of the car, and we walked up to the front door of my house where Diane was inside making dinner. And the evening was warm and the neighborhood was quiet. And I thought about a phone buzzing on a side table on a Tuesday night and how much everything depended on someone being awake to answer.